its metamorphosis in architecture. And over the course of these days, we've had some very interesting dialogues. So starting off with our technical session, the topic of discussion will be adding green to the sand. The session will be moderated by architect Qazi M. Arif. The speakers of this session are architect Mridul, architect Chitra Vishwanath, architect Szue Hann, and architect Yatin Pandya. The technical session will be followed by expert speaks with Dr. Alka Pandey. Moving on, please join me in welcoming to the stage one of India's most renowned architects and a moderator of the session, architect Qazi M. Arif. Sir, please. Architect Arif, the principal head of ENVISION Architects, has authored a number of technical research papers focusing on green and sustainability of architecture, building and cities, and has lectured in many national and international congress and conferences, including PLE, Arcacia, UIA, and SARC. Sir, I would request you to please come.
Good morning to all of you. I think it's still morning. I'm really sorry to be late coming into this hall because I was stuck with the keynote presentation and I was sitting incidentally in the front row and just couldn't get out of it. And I hope many of you have enjoyed the keynote speech by Marina Tabassum. I'm really proud because I am from the same city as Marina is. And I'm not an Indian architect. I'm from Bangladesh. Anyway, the session, as you know, is titled Adding Green to the Sand. I'm supposed to moderate the session, but I thought, why not I try to kind of explain a little bit what exactly we try to mean by this title. It's not very difficult to interpret the title in words, but let me just go through some slides and try to explain the way I thought the session should be addressing. Adding green to the sand. I'm sure the earth and the place that we have been living has always been green, but we all are aware that the world has changed for the worse. And I would like to say it's like adding sand to the green. Many attributes contribute in our journey of adding sand to the green. Buildings, to begin with, wherever the involvement of architects comes in. Just some of the statistics that I will be talking through would kind of try to set the mood for the session. Like, these statistics are almost floating all around the internet, and we are all aware. But I thought to mention a few for us to kind of have the right temperament to go through this technical session. The buildings, this is a photograph from my city, Dhaka. The jungle, the concrete jungle, which the buildings are using energy, the total consumption of energy, buildings are using about 35% of energy, and it's emitting the carbon, about 38% of global emission of carbon dioxide. The automobile, this is from Gurgaon, nearby. Energy used by automobile globally is about 28%, and the carbon emission is about 23%. This is all adding sand to our lovely planet, the green planet. Air conditioners, at this moment, 1.6 billion heating, ventilation, and air conditioning units. Not really at this moment. By 2030, we're expecting to cool down or HVAC system all over the globe. And this number would raise to 5.6 billion by 2030. And that means about 10 units per second. This is from Morocco. deforestation, a very common thing, common issue of disaster. And 50% of the Earth's original forest cover is gone, much of it gone in last 3 decades. And 15% of the carbon released in the environment is due to this deforestation. This is a photograph from USA. Industries, of course, contributing to polluting air. And this is important to know that the concentration of carbon in atmosphere as of May 2020 is 416 ppm, and that's highest in the human history. And it's interesting to know, just about a few days back, it rose up to 420 ppm, ever highest in human history. That's all causing the global warming. We know the buzzword global warming for the last 2 decades. And it's interesting again to know that in the last 22 years, 20 were the warmest year for the Earth in the history of civilization. Isn't that alarming? And all this global warming caused by these automobiles, the unplanned civilization, and the use of fossil fuels, causing the polar ice depletion. The polar sea ice coverage continued its downward trend in 2019, both at the Arctic and Antarctic oceans, recorded their second smallest average annual sea ice coverage during the 1979 to 2019 period of these 40 years. And that causes sea level rise, of course. Global sea level rise rose about 8 inches in the last century. Rate in the last 2 decades is nearly double that of the last century. Desertification, this is from Pakistan. Desertification puts at risk the health and well-being of 1.2 billion people in more than 100 countries. Flood, a common problem. Flood has always been there, but the rate of floods, the unusual floods because of the climate change is alarming. Wildfire, this is from Australia in 2013. There have been much more numbers of wildfire than ever before that's affecting Australia and different other parts of the world. Smog, a common problem in New Delhi, Beijing, Ulaanbaatar, Lahore, and Riyadh and Cairo. Cyclone and typhoon, this is from the Philippines in 2013, when the strongest tropical cyclone Haiyan made the most disastrous landfall in 2013. Migration, another common problem for climate change. This is from Bangladesh. Another crisis coming up, which is not directly related with the scope of architects, but this is going to be affecting every single person on Earth. That's the food price hike. Reduction of global crop yields by about 10% by 2050. And in the next 10 years, the food price might hike up to 50 to 60% increase. So the issue is, worst is yet to come. So what do? We just don't have the planet B. We have to live and survive in this planet. So we need to keep on adding green to the sand. And how the architects can add green to the sand? To be more aware about the climate adaptability and bioclimatic design. That's common for all the students. We go through schools and learn all this. We try to practice in our profession that we need to uphold sustainability, resilience, and we have to become responsive and responsible. I'm gonna go through quick few slides that are being proposed to add green to the sand with the help of technology and innovation. This is an image of Africa. 11 countries have a project to greening the landscape. to transform the lives of 100 million people and 8,000 by 15-kilometer mosaic of trees, grasslands, vegetation, and plants. And they're going to change, expected to change, 100 million hectares of degraded land restored, 250 million tons of carbon sequestered, and 10 million green jobs created by 2030. This is a project initiated in 2005 and expected to be completed in 2025. I'm not kind of marketing with these ideas. There may be more debates on if this is the way to greening the landscape or leave the landscape as it is, try to restore what it has been. It is just an example of the efforts of sensitive people in order to make our planet green. Vertical green, another common topic, and in the last 2 decades, there have been many attempts by the architects to make vertical greens. And this is a project from Bangladesh by architect Baijit, who is also here in Jaipur during this festival. And the statistics go like that. 93% of the 61 large-scale outdoor green walls constructed after 2007. So the awareness of creating vertical green is another attempt to kind of add greening. This is an example from China, the lowest plateau. The image on the left is from 2007, and the image on the right is a green, and the river is from 2019. So basically, these are few attempts that architects are trying to add green or come with green architecture or green landscape with the help of innovation and technology. But when you talk about deserts, when you talk about the landscape like you have in Rajasthan, we really need to understand the ecology of sand and do the appropriate architecture. This is again another attempt by architect June Nouvel in National Museum of Qatar, where he tried to kind of be inspired by the desert rose that inspired the formation of this museum. This is again another inspiration from the sand in Saudi Arabia. Ex-architects, a local company, they came up with a proposal in 2019 with a resort inspired by the sand dunes and the landscape of the sand. Then again, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to kind of market these architectures. They are not yet tested if they are the right solution for the desert. All I'm trying to say is that there are being many attempts all over the globe with the innovation and technology. But what I think is most important is try to understand again and again the ecology of the sand and get the lessons from the ancestral wisdom. And I believe Jaipur is the best place that we can learn from our ancestral wisdom. If you look at the vernacular architecture of Rajasthan, which I'm not an expert of, you guys, every one of you know more than me, but I'm always inspired by the attempts of this ancestral wisdom, which is the mirror of climatic response, the climate, the culture, and material of this landscape. The vernacular architecture of Rajasthan, just some attributes, the temples, palaces, pavilions, textured walls and surfaces, thick slabs and walls. You know more than me. The baradaris and the chhatris, the entrances and the shading elements, and the water system management, the talabs, kunds and bauris, the connectivity of the lakes, these ancestral wisdoms, together with, of course, the gardens and courtyards, the orientations, and the grids, the intelligent grids in the planning, these all comprise the richness of the heritage of Rajasthan that we need to take home from here, whatever we have or we can experience. And I'm sure many of you are experiencing the heritage walks in the early mornings yesterday and today. So these are all the learnings and the rich wisdom that we can take home and kind of try to practice in our architecture. Try to take the inspirations from the past, the vernacular architecture of Rajasthan, in our journey adding green to the sand. And this is the last slide, which is again from Dhaka. You remember the first slide I showed the buildings, the jungles of concrete in Dhaka. This is another attempt by local architect Bhitti Sthapati Brinda Limited to try to add green in that concrete jungle. So let's try to continue and let's hear what our speakers, the element set of panelists here today, think about adding green to the sand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Qazi sir, for your wonderful presentation. Now, I would like you to join me in welcoming architect Mridul to the stage. He is an internationally awarded architect and has a varied palette of projects in India and the US. He has delivered talks not only in India, but also globally. He was also designated a leader of sustainability for the Executive Master of Natural Resources program of Virginia Tech University. He sits on juries for awards and theses and boards of public and private institutions. He's the proud recipient of prestigious awards in India, Istanbul, and Vienna. Sorry. Today, he will talk about Barkha Bowery, which has been featured in multiple publications and won multiple awards. Sir Mridul, please.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank the Indian Institute of Architects, Rajasthan chapter, for having me over here and speak on a very, very important topic. My talk would be, I would be addressing the relationship between water and communities and architecture that makes it possible, that brings the two together. And how the breakdown of this relationship has actually plunged us into the severe water crisis that we are in today. And I would also like to share my understanding of how a renaissance of traditional architecture, water architecture, can help us come out of this crisis. And that will be exemplified by one of my projects, Barkha Bowery, which was built in Jodhpur in the year 2009. But before I go there, I would like to just briefly touch upon the historical context of how this Bowery was created, and I would like to speak about the historic water architecture of Jodhpur. Jodhpur was founded in mid-15th century on a very small outcrop, a small hillock of Aravalli range. Rav Jodha, he shifted his kingdom from Mandor, which is on the north of Jodhpur, to a small hillock that's called Pachetia Hill. And when this was acquired, there was no water over there, there are no seasonal rivers over there. It is a very, very dry climate, temperature soaring up to 50 degrees centigrade. And there's literally no water body over there. Yet they decided to settle over there because they used the astute ingenuity to generate water sources by rain, the water that fell on the land. And over the centuries, Jodhpur managed to develop what probably is one of the best examples of local indigenous water network that's available in India. And they built a very, very robust kind of a, water architecture and water system that addressed the water problems that this city had. The only time probably when they were plunged into drought was when they had extended periods when there were no rains over there. And the key was that it was always a work in progress. We've lost that key, but the key was it was a work in progress because as the city grew, as population grew, they kept adding more and more water bodies. Like this was at the end of 15th century. It's a very, very small settlement and one or two water bodies. The one you see on top was the original depression in the hillocks of Jodhpur from where they would collect water and they would bring it to the city. And they created many man-made ones within the city. So at the end of 15th century, this is what must have been the map of Jodhpur. You see the blue dots as they keep increasing. This is at the end of 16th century, they added more water bodies. Then at the end of 17th century, they had yet more. And we are trying to build this atlas, water atlas. We are trying to discover where all the old water bodies are. Some of them are just gone, they're just submerged, people have built over them, or they've just closed. We're trying to discover that also. And at the end of 19th century, whatever water bodies are there were already in place. Because it was after that that the whole tradition of building water bodies, the work in progress, had come to a halt. And this is the zoomed out map Jodhpur. So they had created, a network of water bodies which were natural lakes, from there the man-made. So from collection, I don't know why it's not working. Yeah. So you had this lake on top, that's a Balsaman lake. This is a natural lake. They just had to build an embankment and the whole water over there. This is another one which is called Ranisar Lake. This is also a very, very natural lake. They just built an embankment. You can see at the end of this, there's an embankment and they could hold water. And from here, they would transport water to, say, man-made tanks, which you see on the top over there. That's a Gulab Sagar tank. That would be for storing water. Then for excess of water, they would have variety of wells. Like you have the step well over here. You have another Bawri over there. So a variety of wells, and there would be simple wells also. And the surplus water would be allowed to flow into a seasonal river, which would go to villages and, nourish the farms, etc. So it was a beautiful system that they had built over there. And it was robust, it lasted, they collected every drop of rain that would fall for as long as possible, and they could collect as much as possible. Saving for a rainy day, a phrase whose literal and figurative meanings are strikingly opposite. And these are not just water containments. As you can see, this is a Gulab Sagar. This is embedded in a very, very thick settlement. Normally historic cities of India would be very densely populated. So these would also be, not only social buildings, but environmental buildings. They would change the microclimate of the place where they were embedded. They would provide, promenades. This would be public space. And they would add, say, some moisture to a very, very dry climate, making the place a little more livable. And these were never left as just pure, water bodies or infrastructure. They had a very, very deep connect between communities, between people and water. And this is what architecture, the buildings would bring about. And the cultural perspective that was built around these water bodies helped in maintaining these water bodies. There were rituals, which would were hedges against desecration of these water bodies. And then there were these more intimate buildings called Bawris, which I think in Gujarat they call Vav, in Delhi they call Bawli. Now these were the more intimate socio-cultural buildings. Fetching water would fall in women's domain. And women, this would be the only time they would have when they can sit at leisure, they can sit and talk and have social interaction. And probably the only time they could take out from the daily chores to come in the afternoon or in the morning when they could fetch water. Unfortunately, with the afflictions of time, with advent of piped water supply, bringing water from remote areas like dams and like faraway rivers, they completely abandoned this indigenous system, this network, and they've allowed it to fall into ruins. You can see this is one of the most beautiful step wells in Jodhpur, Kriya Ka Jhalra, but see the kind of condition it has fallen into. It's because instead of complementing to a new modern system, they completely abandoned it. And government was, of course, complicit in doing this. In fact, many of people who come to work in my office, or people of last 2 generations, they don't even know that something of this kind existed until we tell them that you go and check these things out. What were temples to water have become tombs to water, literally and figuratively. And there came a halt of that whole process, that mode of, work in progress. And we are today in a terrible condition today. We are depending on another state to get water over there. Then there are, times when 2 or 3 days, 2 or 3 whole days, we don't get water in certain parts of the country. There are some elite areas, but there are certain parts of the city you don't get water at all. And this is the scramble of water. This is somewhere from Rajasthan, and this is not uncommon to India. This is what is going to happen. This is happening in places like, higher rainfall areas or, average good rainfall areas also. And if we don't wake up in time, because this is all reversible, if we don't wake up in time and if we don't take care of this, we are going to be heading for disaster. So amid the, this deepening water crisis, it has become vital that we revisit our ancient system, look at it, see how we can reuse it, complement it already with the existing system. I'll quickly go through this and start, we've in fact developed a template of regeneration, iteration by way of replication, and mainstreaming. So as a first, what we have done is we've identified a large number of water bodies, old water bodies, which we've taken up for conservation. And this is probably the second one that I'm showing to you. So this is what you see on the left is when it was in a very terrible state, fraught with a lot of vegetation, there were structural damages, etc. And then we took it up. We did not use any cement or steel. We just used the material that was there, the stone. We used some lime, and we just rebuilt the whole thing, regenerated the whole thing, and we have mainstreamed it to the city's network. You can see there's yet another water bodies. These are being used socially also. They are being used by community. So the active, they've been made active only not for the water that they have, but even for the socio-cultural connect that was there traditionally with these water bodies. And finally, I'll come to, because you see, surely just redoing these water bodies, regenerating these water bodies is not enough because our cities have grown, population has grown. So what we have to learn is we have to start that work in progress again. We have to start adding more and more water bodies in our city, in the colonial colonies, in the new neighborhoods that have come up now. And towards this, one experiment we've done that's very successful. So in the beginning of this century, they initiated a new township called E.A.R.T.H on one of the foothills of Umaid Bhawan Palace. You can see this is a small hillock. So under this, you can see this long, 2-kilometer long stretch of a water body, very narrow one. And this is when they started doing this, I think, in the year 2002. And this is the picture of the land when we acquired it. Absolutely barren. There were no trees. There was no water body. In fact, water would come on the other side. There were water bodies on the side, but not over here. So to have a very good township, you definitely needed green. But state does not have enough water to give to you, and there is not enough water, underground water, because we have touched 300, 400 feet now, and that water is too brackish. So we thought we'll just resort to the ancient wisdom and try and create what our ancestors did. We create our own water body, and that's how the idea of doing Birkha Bawri germinated. So this is a master plan, very general picture I'm showing of the master plan. It was done in a way that there was a central core of green landscape parks. In the middle, you see the one where you have the blue arrows going. This was the lowermost portion. And we decided that this is where we are going to put our Bawri, because this would, the storm water would flow over here, by gravity, and we would not require anything to lift over here. So this is what we selected, and we created this. This master plan was done by Mr. U.C. Jain, and we've done this Bawri over here. So it has a very unique structural system. We did not use RCC at all, and we did not use steel. We've just used stone. So what we have done is that these vaults that you have, these traditional vaults, we have appended those vaults, kept two walls against each other, counterbalance their strength, counterbalance the pressure that earth would apply, and very, very simple walls we have, and the thickness even at the bottommost portion, 60 feet from the ground, is just 0.7 meters. Otherwise, if we were to do, the conventional stone walls, they would be 7 feet wide, like a dam, like a structure. And module that we developed, we conjoined about 14 such modules. starting from this, and this is almost about 235 meters long, going about 18 meters below Earth. The water depth would be about 11 meters when at its fullest, and we managed to collect about 17.5 million liters of rainwater in this. And in doing this Bowery, what we have used is the overburden of the hillock. So when we were doing roads over there, we removed this stone. Throwing the stone out would have cost us. It would have cost us a lot of carbon footprint also. So we used the stone, and we have used in making of these arcuated walls. And all the scrap that came out of making the stone, that also we've used in concrete or infills and backfills and heartings. And the excavated earth for this, we have used in, filling the land where there were undulations, etc. So we kind of achieved a geological balance. And these are people who are picking up stone. This is a very, very special skill. The skill is dying. These people are becoming extinct because we have a lot of cranes and mechanical ways of lifting stone. But we made sure that somehow we managed to keep the skill alive, and we've used these people are called chavaliyas. And this is the kind of thing, an entirely subterranean structure that we have. I'll quickly give you a tour through that. This is a small veranda through which you enter. And this is it's a combination of a step pond and Bowery. I mean, it's not just that it's a wow, it's a combination of two. So this is the kind of grand receiving area. And the two-storied pavilion marks the entrance to the main Bowery, which is about 750 feet long. You take one round and you will have done 1/4 of a kilometer. These are the tributed frames which you would find, these tributed frames in old Boweries where you go to Gujarat and in Rajasthan, in western Rajasthan. And the binocular view that these are offering, you can see there are inlets on the other side, 735 feet, 235 meters at the other end. And these are the pavilions that you can liken to the pavilions that we have seen in other Boweries where, social interaction would take place. So basically, these are the tributed frames which are holding the arcuated walls. On top of that, we have created two pavilions where people can go and sit. These are the arcuated walls which come, because you see, we did not have money to do a very, very detailed or, carving, etc. We've used raw stone as it was available. I mean, these are views which you will not get because it's filled with water, but as you go deeper, the shadows, they elongate, the voices muffle, echoes increase. It becomes a very beautiful experience. And when you start looking up, the shape of the sky is offered in so many different, the first one, the tributed frames, gives you a kind of a rectangular shape of sky. The arcuated walls, you see walls, sky as if it is held in parenthesis, and the last final circular bay, kind of draws the entire sunlight to light up its cavern. And true to the tradition, it is also a public space. There's a meandering lawn all around it, so people come in the morning for a walk. And, this is also a socio-cultural space. A lot of dance recitals are happening over here. People come to celebrate. And it has become a very coveted space for dance recitals. Like this is a Sufi dance which is happening. A lot of shootings, etc. take place. If you leave these just as pure infrastructure, they will die. So you have to have community connect with these water bodies. This is the before picture which I've shared with you earlier of how the site was. And this is the after picture. The transformations that such projects can have from barren to lush green. I will end by saying that Birka Bowery demonstrates that such projects are still possible at this scale. Architecturally, they are feasible. Financially, they are viable. And India needs to foster an interaction between its natural and built capital, ancient and modern infrastructure, and create a water grid which is sustainable, and we get back to putting this into the mode of work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for this very inspiring presentation. Now, I would like you all to please join me in welcoming architect Chitra Vishwanath to the stage. She is the architect founder of Biome Environmental Solutions Bangalore, a practice spanning 30 years in the field of ecological designs. Over the years, the practice has grown from a one-woman proprietary model to a 40-people team working on architecture and water issues. Ma'am, we would request you to please come onto the stage.
Thank you, Arif, IIA, for the invitation. And it's been a great possibility of exchange of ideas. It has been certainly heady 2 days. My PPT is not of our works, but of few ideas. Paraphrasing Cobb from my favorite movie, Inception, I say, an idea is like a virus, resilient, highly contagious. And even the smallest seed of an idea can grow. It can grow to define or destroy you. What has been important for me is been learning from the small. We in India are 131 out of the 189 countries in the world in the level of Human Development Index. 80% of us live in congested housing. Even when slum rehabilitation builds housing, it's done woefully bad. It lacks the basics of good ventilation. Qazi showed how every 10 seconds we will be going in for an AC. Yeah? And studies in Mumbai slums have shown that 100% of inhabitants of any SRH buy an AC as soon as they move in. And the vicious cycle continues. But we have urban bylaws, and these bylaws are obsolete. Yesterday, Niti Aayog proposed a change, and is proposing a change in bylaws. And it's talking about economics, development, and appropriate management. But in the whole, whatever paper they have submitted, they're not talking about air, water, soil, or our children, or our grandchildren. This is the this is a screenshot I took of the study by WRI on heat island effect in the 4 cities. You can see 2008 and what's happening in 2021, including Bangalore, which we say, oh, it's very pleasant, but still, the thing is growing. So, I'm saying is that, what do we do? Could we start looking at a new narrative? Could we start looking at something different? Yes, it was a new narrative when they decided to build Jaipur. There was nothing to fall back upon. It's a new narrative. Architect Mridul showed us. It is something more we could do in this era of Anthropocene. And first, we start with the fine print. We demand that we need cool spaces to live and work as a human right. Yes, so we prioritize shade. Unfortunately, we don't have time to grow trees, so let's not cut them. But also let's think of building differently and using spaces differently. Can we use our public space to relax like this? And I'm not really only complaining, but I think it's also a hugely feminine requirement. Without the spit and the urine smell, can we have the public space? So getting back to this is a study from Netherlands where they're looking at new towns and how do you design with ecosystem in mind? How do you design with sun in mind? So they design with the sun path. So here studies show how sun can reach to the lowest level at different times of the day? And how do you decide on what height the building should be? Not based on bylaws, not based on width of the road, and then you can decide on what height or what setbacks you leave and what you height do. And then I will put a solar system on my terrace, but my neighbor would put a 20-floor high building and my solar system is totally gone. No, you have to decide this whole thing not only with just one building, but how do buildings talk to each other? And get the daylight inside. We love our old buildings, which just say they're so good, they're great, but we're using for different purposes. If we're using the buildings for offices, for institutions, for classrooms, we need daylight inside. And one of the reasons why we use glass is for that purpose. And so let's not demonize glass, but let's understand how the two can marry. And how do you now decide on various different buildings coming next to you? So I come with, is it possible to think of the underground? There are lots of buildings which you could do. Yesterday, Chan and I went into a building here in Jaipur, and they had a lovely underground. He said he also had a well, but now it's all dry. There is dirt inside, and it can't be used, but there is an underground. Yesterday, Raza showed us these lovely underground spaces in Iran, which they used in summer. Today, we saw Marina building an underground museum in Bangladesh with water over there. So it's amazing. No? And here in Derinque, 1800 BC, 20,000 inhabitants lived in underground. They lived, they had markets, they had cultural spaces. This is a museum in Helsinki, Amox Rex, which was made under a plaza. And it's underground because you don't want to take up any more space. And there's just beautiful skylights which give light inside, but also are spaces to enjoy by the children. And Helsinki completed a master plan in 2019, covering 214 square kilometers, combining energy conservation shelter from its long cold winters, and also a bunker in case of Russian aggression. I think they were foresight, no? They really thought ahead. So, like I said, learning from small, this is our basement in Bangalore, which is designed in 1995. It remains 22 degrees centigrade throughout the year. We Bangaloreans complain when it's 35 degrees. We say it's very hot. So for us, it's important that we have. And also designed in such a way for the diurnal variation of Bangalore's daily temperature changes. So we'll have 15 degrees in the night and morning and 30 degrees in the daytime. So you could use the basement, you could use the mezzanines to sleep, just a bed which is at a higher height. And now the basements are becoming better and sexier, so you have skylights, to the fact that we keep getting greedy about making basements. So we have gardens and wells in the basement. But also, why are we greedy? Because we noticed that the earth we remove from one basement is enough to build 3 more homes. So Mridul, I was just greatly thrilled that you used the stone and the soil and just reused it, and your phrase of geological, net zero geological. So here, this was a house we made with a large basement and a garden and a well, so we got a lot of earth, and luckily it was in the outskirts, so we kept making the blocks just for some rainy day. That means we had to do a school later where we couldn't have basement, and we had to do it very fast, so we made blocks for it and took it there. And this is the study which tells us, yes, we get 3 times the amount of soil what we would get. Yes, I'm finishing. Yeah. So, Mini has a basement of 150 cubic meter, but uses only 55, and Uma could use that for her house. So what we call as a collaborative, cooperative process, and from that, the city becomes the supplier of your materials. You don't have to go out of the city for that. Then this I call the mother of all undergrounds. This is a school in Coimbatore in South India, which not only has the classrooms in the basement, though basement is not allowed by bylaws, so you make the play fields also a basement. So now it's not a basement because you can come out. So, but at no point should you make undergrounds without taking into the factor of aquifers. That's Raghu Rai's iconic picture in 1976 summer of Agrasen Ki Bawli. And on the right is a picture I took in January 2020, dry. It's a lovely space for all the youngsters to go, but no longer is any water. Why did that happen? We got a metro station, Shivaji Stadium metro station, very big place. You have to go there to get your visa. And it dried up this water body. So how do we talk to each other? How do cities not depend on some obsolete bylaws? So let's change the narrative. And change it in many ways. Think of your terraces as something smart. Think of your terraces which would give you water for drinking and cooking. We have the cleanest water which would provide for your energy needs. And that's why, again, think of the various heights, how you will put. You can grow food. We grow rice on our terrace and take care of human manure. You're all walking fertilizer factories, all of you. So use that to grow your food, make soil, which is something which is not available. And with that, we would get to be building with carrying capacity. India says that 400 people in 1 square kilometer is the density required in an urban area. We've done studies, and we say that to get water, energy, food, taking care of human manure is sanitation, and for biodiversity, you need about 40 square meter per person. This is in Bangalore. Use it for your city separately. I could give a different presentation sometime where I could give you numbers. So you still have 2,460 square meters per person for schools, roads, public spaces, and planting trees. Thank you. More of it, you could see it on our website, and if possible, read the Biome diaries. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sure all of us would agree that it was indeed a very insightful and amazing presentation. Now I would like to call upon architect Szue Hann. He's an award-winning architect, strategist, and thought leader in sustainability and sustainable development. He's the chairman of sustainability at the Singapore Institute of Architects, the professional body of architects in Singapore.
Testing. Testing. All right. Can you guys hear me? Actually, you can hear me without a mic, right? It's a small room. First of all, thank you to I.A.R.T.H Rajasthan chapter for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, like my colleagues from Singapore and also some of our international guests. Really thankful to architect Tushar, architect Yanendra, who's also here, of course, for the invitation. It's always good to come back to Jaipur, although we joke that, hey, couldn't you have done this on a cooler month? That being said, by day 2, we all got used to the weather, and by the time it was, I think, about 39 degrees, we actually felt that it was very cool, right? So that's human adaptation, that is survival, that is also resilience, and incidentally, resilience is what I'll be talking about today. You need the mic. Oh, sorry, is this better? Okay, now I don't have to shout, that's good. It's not working now, but it's I'll just stick here. I think, yeah, stick to the tried and tested method. Why didn't I think about that? It's just that the screen is out of sight because I'm not exactly very tall. But don't worry about it. This is good. This is good. All right. So thank you. We return from the commercial break. My time starts now. We'll start with the green and blue in planning, right, that my esteemed speakers before me have already shared. There's a lot of talk about water infrastructure, about green infrastructure, and so on as well. Thank you, Architect Qazi, for sharing what adding green to the sand actually meant. I think up to just before your speech, I still didn't exactly know what it meant. But I'm glad whatever I did prepare coincides a little bit, right? So I'm sorry about the font. It sort of ran a little bit, but here's a quiz. What does the first number say? 2010? Nope. Try again. 2012? Nope. Do I hear 2019? I hear 2019. It's 2019. After that, 2020, 2021, right? So I won't go through any more bad news because Qazi has shared all the bad news we need to know. Right? I will share, however, that it is now 2022. Right? This slide, I must admit, was prepared last year, right? So it's now 2022, and what that means is we've all survived all these things, right? So can you do me a favor? Reach out to the person in front of you, give him or her, depending on your preference, a big pat on the back and say, well done, everybody, you survived. I love it because I sit the person in front of you and I see people doing this. Well done. Good job. Moving on, right? So this is a little study. We hear about carbon, we talk about decarbonization, and there is a huge thing about decarbonization happening in Singapore. By the way, I'm from Singapore. I think I was earlier introduced, and they've introduced this whole carbon international exchange, which looks at ways of possibly shifting and trading carbon in the mode of planning for a greener city, or planning for a greener country. A bit more on that later on. But carbon really is just one of many different things we need to look at. And, well, the resolution isn't great, to be honest, but if you look up the planetary boundaries model, it's all out there on Google image search. This was done by the good folk at the Stockholm Institute, and it talks about 9 different sectors in which we're facing some risk, right? So biodiversity is some of them, marine species and so on. So carbon is something, it's just 1 out of the 9, to be honest. Of course it is significant, but it's not the only one. So we need to think about how we can live in a just and sort of equitable sort of circle. Yes, I'm glad the aspect ratio makes it a circle now, but basically this inner circle is a social foundation beneath which it is no longer viable to live, right? Because you don't have your regular sort of basic creature comforts. And on the outer ring is an ecological ceiling beyond which it becomes untenable for the planet, right? Because you're stressing it too much. So the idea is to try to operate within the green as much as possible. That doesn't mean that you do not grow economically. That just means you go through different cycles of growth, similar to what we experience in nature, right? I will just flash this for exactly half a second. You guys have seen it and seen it too much. But what we do in the Singapore Institute of Architects, in the Sustainability Committee, is that we find ways in which architects, and I imagine most, if not all of us in this room are architects, we imagine a role where architects actually have agency in fulfilling or in perpetuating the goals of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We call them the Environmental Design Goals, and there are 7 of them, and they all have different modes of agency with what we do with building, right? And a big shout out to our president, Melvin, my colleague CK here as well from the SIA. I think Rita is also in Jaipur, right? And we work very closely together as a council to sort of achieve these efforts throughout the building pursuits. Some of the projects I've done earlier in my career, admittedly not too long a career yet, hopefully, include some elements which take on some of these environmental design guidelines. So natural capital, wherein we maximize the effect, maximize what nature actually brings in, whilst sort of contesting with the modern day facades that people require, that our clients require, with the modern day programs that our clients do require, and as such, increase as much as possible the quotient of good passive design and natural ventilation. This would be resource management, which in this case uses existing material. Here's a building that makes use of 1.5 million recycled water bottles, right, plastic water bottles. They do have, use even beyond their current use as plastic bottles, but as far as possible, of course, try not to use them. But internally, this is what we could actually do, right, with the furniture and so on. It's not going to run you away. You're not going to run away from the steel structures and your glass structures and so on, right? But you could use a lot of these as different facade materials. And in the case of urban harmony, basically planning with the neighbors and so on, here's a project with Woha Architects when I first started out my career not too long, well, quite long ago actually. But the idea of introducing sort of urban lungs and so on within the buildings, creating areas of chance encounters, creating areas of ventilation as well. I think the stack effect was mentioned in some of the talks yesterday. I think it was the Iranian architect who spoke. And some of these do show up, I think, in modern architecture as well. Health and well-being, here's a proposal for a hospital. It's in India, coincidentally. This is actually in Trivandrum. And the idea was for each ward to have access to visual greens, right? So the moment you have access to visual greens, and if you subscribe to the whole biophilia mode of thinking, you could sort of psychologically be healed. But at the same time, there's, of course, environmental benefits that greening does allow. Adaptability. Left and right, right? You've got two old colonial buildings, not too old compared to India, old in the Singapore context. And in the middle is actually this new building. It's glass, and it bridges both the old and the new, and it creates a contiguous furniture gallery for a leading furniture brand in Asia and the Asia Pacific, right? And in the middle is really where you find these sort of large volumes that does connect these two existing structures. So it gets out, but at the same time it connects. Also, an office building that's built on top of an existing factory building or existing warehousing building, right? So that takes it from 10 stories to 12 stories with the exact same structure, and therefore saving costs in terms of new construction. And as an amalgamation of these 7 SDGs, I've only shown you 4 earlier, but 7 SDGs, during the pandemic, we did think about the possibilities of coming up with a new modular green building typology. We made reference from the old Diwan, the old forum, and the old sort of naturally ventilated halls, and we adapted that into a new modular building that, first of all, could be adapted into various things. So food resiliency on the top with urban farms, and you've got different sort of ward sort of facilities and accesses to satellite hospitals and so on as well. So sustainable buildings do have significant agency in the fight against any global pandemic in the future. We do have a lot to go, to be honest. These are the pillars of the Singapore Green Plan. It's a plan introduced last year with goals of achieving certain sustainability targets in 2030. And this drives, first of all, sustainability practice and also the way the economy in Singapore is looking to for the next 8 to 10 years, right? And that leads us hopefully towards a resilient future. So if you look at these, right, the text may not be clear, but it says city in nature, sustainable living, energy reset, green economy, and green government, right? And if you look at what the role of the architect is, the answer is the architect can, in fact, play a role in all of the above. Architects have an agency not just in design, but in the way you shape people's lives, in the way you shape how they live, who they vote for even, right? And ultimately, you also have a role in basically presenting professional thoughts to your government leaders and so on, and pushing for sustainable environments. Singapore is 700 square kilometers. The areas in pink are what has been reclaimed. The areas in dark pink are the areas that will be reclaimed in the future. By the time we complete, it will be a net increase of about 40% of the existing area, right? Can you imagine a country that can expand 40% of its land area without trying to invade anyone else? So in its land use and zoning, basically, we've got it down to a T. It's like a giant Sudoku puzzle. Everything has a plot ratio. Every single inch of land, because it's so small, has been planned down to the last square inch, right? And that means green. The area of green sometimes is not as sufficient as it should be. But in the past 3 or 4 master plans, they started introducing more green into the picture. So adding green to the land. And basically, we thought about, in this case, to be honest, it's actually Melvin's discussions that we had with the Urban Redevelopment Authority. Right? And we talked about different shades, different intensities of green, where you have green that's for leisure, green that's for productive use. You could plant horticulture on it, right? You could have buildings with integrated green on it, and that lends you different shades of green and also possibly different shades of blue, and just some examples of how these projects can actually add different shades of green to the grays, right? Parking lots. If we're all moving away from cars, moving towards public transport, this is what we could do. This is not in Singapore, it's actually in Thailand. I've got a colleague from Thailand here as well, right, Acha. And this is an amazing project of how both green and blue can be added into urban infrastructure as well. It's a university campus. I think it's Thammasat University. Anyone been to Singapore? Do you recognize this thing? See, water crisis is no longer spewing any water from its mouth. Water crisis, not only is it not spewing any water, the sea levels are rising, right? 2022, if there's any flash floods, right? This is about as much as we can cope. 2100, by the time your kids or your grandkids visit Singapore, this thing will be swimming. Although I don't know how it swims because it's got no fins, right? But it is true, we do have, well, globally, of course, right? We do have a rising seawater levels crisis, and how are we actually going to face that? Some aspects of urban resilience. You mentioned underground, right, Chitra, earlier, right? So this is in Tokyo, and this is a little sort of displacement tank for flash floods. What we try to do is we try to turn concrete. By we, I mean Singapore. I didn't work on this project, but it is a very popular public project by Ramble Studio Drycycle, a landscaping company. And this was what this used to be, a canal. This is the new park that it's become. And when it's dry, when it's hot, well, it's always hot, but when it's dry, this is what it looks like. Right? When it's wet, it becomes, again, a flooded embankment of water. Right? And that's one way of dealing with the green and the blue. My final 2 slides, maybe 3 or more, is that we look at ways of actually finding measurements all the time. In Singapore, it's all about measurements, measurements, measurements. And that's the way we operate. Not that it's good or bad, it's the way we operate because everything is tied down to a commercial real estate value. It's also because everything is tied down to, in this case, a green mark score. Right? Green mark is sort of like our IGBI accreditation, our LEED accreditation, right? Some ways around that would be you try to make it more intelligent. You use the blockchain, you use different kinds of technologies, you use AI in order to be able to deal with that. But fundamentally, I think we need to go back to the fundamentals of architecture, right? What is a nice space, as our colleagues have shown us this morning and in the past 2 days? What is vernacular wisdom that we can actually use, right? What is blue, what is green, what is gray? So as we progress, let us not forget what made us, and I want to close off by a big thank you, right? I think there's amazing examples over the past 2 days that I didn't manage to fit into the slides, but I think we've visited Hawa Mahal. We've also visited the Bowery at Nahaga Fort, right, earlier this morning. And really some of the examples that we tried to do, we tried to, sort of design, have been done so many thousands of years ago and by our ancestors. So let's go back to what made us who we are. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you, sir, for your presentation, and please accept our apologies for the technical glitches. Next, I would like to welcome on stage architect Yatin Pandya, our final speaker of the technical session. He's an author, activist, academician, researcher, as well as the practicing architect with his firm, Footprints Earth, which is an acronym for Environment, Architecture, Research, Technology, and Housing.
Can I have you? Namaskar, very good afternoon. Honored to be here. I might not be saying anything more. I'm sure you all have been doing better work than me. I might be just the 13th person passing by. So I'll just use my whatever extra time here to share some of the interpretations. So I think we all have more or less agreed on the kind of approaches. What I want to run through is the kind of interpretation at different scales of our intervention that we have been involved with and we have been doing. I begin with this just to take off from the previous presentation, that I don't think we need to convince us all about certain things because we were in a search of a different kind of a world. thanks to, maybe even if it sounds ironic, the pandemic taught us many lessons, that it was most important factor of existence, human to human bond and balance, and human to environment bond and balance. So I think any development that situates itself onto these two fundamentals, it taught us lessons of plurality, humility, frugality. And we had given up that we were too many on this planet and anything cannot be done to it. Once again, when the undue systems were taken off, we saw that nature corrected itself and gave us a lot of hope that we can come back and still. So if we can turn this calamity into a virtue and realign rather than what we went for in the name of smart city, which looked more like a slogan than a vision. And this is the image, I don't want to challenge anyone, but all around the globe, you put any name from any country or city, and it stands correct. But even back here in India, these are the names. You have to trust me for it to be true. How diverse a culture, geography, etc., and it still has the same outcome. We need to question, and that's where I think this forum is of some value. Both are Kerala. We need to pause and think which Kerala is what we want, which Kolkata is right for us, and which Jaipur we want to promote. Lessons we've already seen. That's where, just picking from the great-grandmothers of all of us, what they've been repeatedly telling in a folklore. Thick wall for insulation. We can have contemporary version of folded plates and all. So nothing is lost. It's just a matter of understanding the principle. But with insulation, what we've forgotten is ventilation. When we just kind of close the same window, it's not the same. We used to live outdoors. So again, outdoor as a living room, with terraces, etc. Three-part window, light, view, and ventilation is the role of fenestration. And like a thali, a bite, we could permute and combine. So control was with us, not like hotel with a fixed glass in Bangalore where outside is 24. You still need to run an AC to get inside 24. Skylight in India, we need Ray-Ban. We have high sky component and glare. We need to diffuse light. What gave us liberty to have a hotel corridors with, doubly loaded blank. Even in the daylight, you have to use light, artificial light and ventilation. We had fantastic solution is jalis, which, respected one-way privacy. You could say inside out, but not outside in. I always say, Padmavati knew how Khilji looked, but Khilji died without knowing what Padmavati looked like. Venturi effect, Laurie Baker also used in contemporary architecture. Courtyard, the DNA of our architecture, right from prehistoric or early civilization till today. Water harvesting in a decentralized way, we saw a nice example. So with all that, I'm running through all those R's that we could be using for this approach. And in the default, I'm changing the scales of intervention. So again, taking the positive note that we can make a difference. So first, refuse. That should be the first. If we don't need an air conditioner, let's not use it. If we don't need a daylight in the afternoon, which will be substituted with this artificial light, let's not do it. So this is the first smallest installation-like intervention in the middle of one of the largest slums in Ahmedabad for the NGO. This is people-built houses, so three sides are shared with a neighbor, and it's a deep, long house. Unlike the courtyard, it's not having any courtyard. So last few rooms are invariably pitch dark and with tin roof, extremely hot. All we did was to just use this PET bottle. This was way before the MIT and the Philippines experience, but that would not give ventilation. It did work for lighting. That 5 paisa, or nobody gives even 5 paisa for throwing away bottle. But then we made, with local help, the dormer windows with translucent kind of a roof, which you could simply put it over a corrugated sheet. And with this install, it's been installed in several hundred, first in Ahmedabad and then in Bhopal homes. And simply with that, these are daylight pictures. There's been 1 year recorded. What does it do to the people is essentially what we're looking at. How can it improve the quality of life? There has been a recorded minimum 250 to 300 rupees saving per month in electricity bill before and then, and minimum of 1,500 rupee increase in their home-based domestic activity, economic activity. Of course, the health level and education level is another thing. In fact, social status. They said, "Hamari betiyon ko hum we called it ujasio. So like toilet, they say ujasio ke wahan behayenge. Then reuse. We have many buildings, and Jaipur is a classic example. Even Corbusier's building has become history to us. And this was the dilapidated state it is. We restored it, we put it to sympathetic purpose, and it's now a city museum, arguably the first and the only museum of the city. Then reuse, what I needed to. This is a commercial building. This is now coming to interior, where we don't have much control on. This is an IT interior, multinational presence, and yet simple common sense principle. In fact, we have to diffuse the light, make an open plan, make everybody take advantage of natural light and ventilation. When weather is favorable, why go to AC? And their own recording is 50% saving in this installation. Redefine what we pick up. This is a residence building for a wealthier family, and yet, I think Antilia needed these principles the most. So it's not about Dukhi architecture, it's just principle that we can put in anything. So it's a least maintenance or no maintenance construction, local brick, etc. Cavity wall construction, water harvesting and recycling. There is water and vegetation for microclimate, natural palette of material. The client came and said, at 70, I want central air conditioning and the kind of new built material. It ended up as selective or no air conditioning and quota stone. Like new interpretation of the courtyard, the main formal drawing room ventilates out of this courtyard system. No chimney in Indian cooking, it's a myth. And this is a skylight which escapes the smell, the heat, and gives you all through the day good natural light. Dynamics of light as sun moves, it kind of, there's a ferrocement roof with a slit, and it's also ventilated with the staggered glass. And as the sun moves, you have this art and kind of craft of the place we like to incorporate in all the projects as far as possible to give them patronage and also no denial to the technology. Respond is a standalone commercial building, and if you see the facade, it corresponds to the orientation of the building that it sits in from a kind of a northeastern, that's a nice music, we'll hear a few more. But, and the southwesterly, which is an operable louver. And this is a jali. We've emulated the kind of monuments of Ahmedabad to give it an identity. And this building, again, a standalone building, recognized through its vegetation in sky. The garden on the right are on the terraces. Then recycle. This is a small institute building. This is in a slum where women in particular are the breadwinners and they are the rack pickers. So there are different examples of recycled waste which was otherwise not effectively used, from a flash break to a waste residue from a dump fill site to a soil block with little kind of binder, and even the crate wood which becomes a partition. This is the widows from the settlement in a evening cool hours in their own compound, singing bhajan just with a thumb pressure, filling in the plastic bottle, which now becomes 2.5 rupee equivalent of a brick. They earn few meals of employment out of that. Similarly, Ahmedabad is a dry city, but there are enough liquor bottles to be found. And this is a west facing so that, no amount of overhang would have cut down that kind of a glare. This really diffuses the light and is a little cheerful for the kids to play there. Similarly, the inert material to be used as a filler slab. Even digital waste here is used as an experiment or as a demonstration. All your rag as well as some of these packaging material, which are neither paper nor plastic, and they get recycled as a paneling material. The scrap from the metal, which becomes, in this case, whatever we got is how spontaneously it was done. It was not premeditated design, but it's an interactive floor with the cycle part. Even the digital waste put here as a door paneling. So it saves on pollution, and with value addition, it even gives employment, and hopefully it performs. We have done all test results for all material, so they are not underperforming. In fact, they're cheaper and better, and it was within the economic framework what other alternative material that might have come about. Similarly, wooden crate paneling, opened up, oil tin containers, louvers out of that, ventilators out of that. Some of these did get emulated by the poorer people in the same settlement, and some other architects picked it up as well. This is a waste from the other construction site. You have to pay to offload. Here we got it as a resource. We developed few other products as well as an experiment. And this is the center in a slum, which is used in different ways itself also. So it's even recycling the space. Morning, it's a school. Then it's a crash through the day, which when both parents go out to earn or do labor, who looks after the kids? So again, the local nannies or dais, they look after this. There's also afternoon literacy program or a computer literacy to give them better employment to the young girls of the settlement. And then it becomes a community center. They celebrate all festivals together. Then to reinterpret, this is a kind of an institutional project which just picks up on those basic common sense principle of, Southwest, this is just checkered board plan. So the courtyard is outdoor living spaces. Southwest is taller. Northeast is, in fact, partly sunk in the ground. That soil is used to park onto the rest of the site to raise the ground from the road which came later that became earth berming. Then this typical outwardly projected profile which we see in Rajasthan and Gujarat. So when sun is overhead, that entire facade is in the shade. One quick study done by one of the students in passing for the interface of Rajasthan was that even if you have 2 inches of cornice, it shelters the facade for more than 25 minutes or so. So that overhang was a big kind of factor. Cavity wall, ventilated cavity, outdoor use of the space, so you don't have to build or overbuild. You could all use this in different time of the day. And of course, the vegetation and recycling, 22 lakh liter is harvested and a lot of waste is recycled. Coming to the settlement, literally greening the desert. This was the outcome post-earthquake. This was a kind of lifestyle. They lived in this in a very harsh climate, still endured and created a beautiful environment. Amitabh Bachchan invites you to have the khushbu of Gujarat here. This is how it fared even after the earthquake. This was the ones which were only standing same place, same impact. This E.A.R.T.H compressive strength material gave way. We were sitting to make an interactive whole planning here in front of the settlement. People to my right is the sponsor. I maintained my paunch, lost the hair. We did this first, the simulation of what we felt was a village-like setup. People kind of reacted to that and they said, are you an architect? We allowed them to play a game with their name in a scale plot to put in accordingly. They did some organization, then we came in, how about open space? They said, okay, architect to lagte ho, hum accept karenge. Then that one was taken to the site with the model, so they understood the orientation, they understood the kind of alignment, etc. That would not give the idea of a scale. So then that was taken to, we had pegged one plot with all those, who said, कि हाँ अहमदाबाद से आते हो पर इतने कंजूस नहीं हो, चलेगा हमारे लिए, And then with the local soil, and they were the expert in knowing how much to balance in terms of fibers or plasticizers, etc. 10 youth produced 3,000 block, earning employment, 300 each for their own house. They were building their own house, so they would do the best they can. Youngest of the family learned from the oldest, so this traditional know-how is passed on. Like this, maybe a 12-year-old knows how to do this complicated roof. And then they dolled up. This was 75 rupees a square feet when the government stipulated cost was 350 rupees square feet. And this was done ready in 2.5 months' time, including celebrating some young person's marriage in between. And this is not just a decor. This is scientific way that in a hot, dry climate, when you have vagaries from outside, we want a small window. That's a wisdom. And small window should not be gloomy. So you have white clay and kind of reflective mirrors, so it's dazzling. Then, of course, these amenities were put in, smokeless chula, so there's no denial to, present in knowledge. So smokeless stove, solar panel, all that was introduced. And from where we dug up the soil, consciously dredged, actually became a reservoir with only 3 inches of rainfall in the middle of desert where there's nothing. And with water coming there on their own initiative, they started agriculture. So the whole ecology of place has changed, and that's where the culture flourishes. And this also had won us the United Nations citation. They asked us to revisit this after 10 years. So some of these are recent slides and so what lessons we learned. And final, regenerate very quickly. Only natural materials have been used to, elements have been used to have these kind of memorial for a Kerala farmer. This is regenerative resource as herbal plantation, etc., all local craft and material, stone, brick, etc. So glamour and beauty both catch our attention, but glamour is applique and temporal. As like fashion, it fades away, while beauty is integral and timeless. And if we pursue that, I think we can empower through design, as I showed at different scales, but goal has to be that we have to improve the quality of life through our endeavors. And to do that, rather than giving Gandhian currency the value, we might have to make Gandhian value itself the currency. I think we have a huge repository of wisdom from our backyard. So if a mantra can be inspired by yesterday and aspired for tomorrow, I'm sure we can make a difference. Thank you so much for your patient listening.
Thank you, sir, for this absolutely wonderful presentation. Well, green is much more than just a color. It's a commitment to conserving the environment. Let's thank our speakers for this insightful session, and let's open the floor for a brief question-answer round. So I request our dear speakers to please take the stage. Requesting everyone to please be very brief with the questions so that we can take as many questions that we can. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Thank you very much. As usual, we are running out of time and people are hungry. They will be angry soon. So we need to wrap up. I don't have appropriate words to thank all the eminent speakers. And unlike yesterday, I'm sure nobody would create a contradiction or confusion. We had sessions yesterday, too many questions, too many debate on one or two speakers. But I must say, all the speakers have been sensitive, rational, have empathy and passion for the planet and the profession. I am very much thankful and grateful to all the speakers. Let's put our hands together. We appreciate the speakers. And I think I should not elaborate how I want to appreciate them. And we have a couple of minutes to take some questions, if there is any. Okay, please introduce yourself and try to be brief and focused with your question, and just mention whoever you want the answer from. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. My name is Pooja Bansal. I'm an architect from Jaipur. My question is to Mr. Mridul. Sir, I would like to ask you if you could share data on the change in water levels after the Bowery and the difference in the residents' expression towards water. In the sense, are they still, washing their driveways with running water, things like that?
Yes, they are washing their driveways and running water. Those are habits which are very difficult to change, and change takes time. The association of the township with this water body is very gradually increasing, because you see, there were almost 2 generations when they were completely cut off from these indigenous water bodies. So that is gradually building up. It takes time. But once that is done, I think community will start taking care of these water bodies. Right now, we have to maintain them, but ultimately. So much is happening in these water bodies, people coming from outside, they're doing research, they're performing over there, so gradually it will catch on.
Thank you. Anyone else? No more questions? Okay, please. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Ananya. I'm a student. My question again is regarding water bodies, and I just want to know, what does it take to revive a water body in terms of like change at a community level? You said that culture, community, and water bodies are very intrinsically tied traditionally. So how did you bring people in? How did you engage with the community?
See, as far as the traditional water bodies are concerned, you must realize that we are not, when we are conserving, we are not putting it to adaptive reuse. We are not repurposing it. You see, temples to gods and temples to water are not repurposed. So even after their being in hiatus for over a century, we are rebuilding them as what they were originally meant for. Now, naturally, there has been a disconnect because, you get water at home, you're not going to fetch over there. So what we are doing is when we are kind of regenerating this, we are involving the community. I showed you a few pictures, how they are going there, taking a swim and all. And gradually, this relationship is going to rebuild. As I said, it's going to take time. And these are the ones which are existing ones. We are worried even about the new ones that we're going to do. So, that's it.
And would you ever in the future need to, feel the need to repurpose them at all? Because the mode of livelihood, a lot of things are going to change in a societal structure in the future with more.
Well, you see, the need for collecting water where it falls is not going to change. It is because we are letting the rainwater go waste, because that's our resource. Look what Rina said in the morning, that they have a lot of water, we don't have water. And we have to harness this water. So this water is going to be there, this is not going to change, we don't need to repurpose it. In fact, we need to embed more and more such water bodies in colonies that have already been built and the new colonies that are going to come up. There are a lot of new townships which are coming up, not only in Jodhpur, in many places, but they don't have water supply. And they put pressure on the PHED, the Groundwater Department, the Public Health and Engineering Department, and they don't have water to give you. Then they go to the courts. And the court tells them that because you have charged them development charges, and because people are going to live here, you have to give water. So all that they can do is they just bring one small, piddly little pipe, leave it at the entrance of the township, and they go away. So these are all dry townships. They have the potential to have their own water bodies, which is what we demonstrated. So now, forget about repurposing. They will have to be new with the same purpose.
So here.
Okay, maybe we'll just take one or two more questions.
So I'm
Go ahead.
Anupama. I'm an architect from Jaipur. My question is to all the Indian architects. From all the sessions I've attended so far here, I realize that our legal system needs to be improved, like our bylaws need to be improved. And obviously politics plays a big role in this. So why don't you my question is, why can't we as architects, like ma'am said, demand a cooler city or a greener city and make a big contribution with studies and research backing our demands to the government and demand, like we need these bylaws, we need to change these outdated, obsolete bylaws.
Who do you want to respond to your question?
Ma'am.
Who wants to? Yeah, Chitra.
Well, it's happening. It takes time. So Bangalore has a bylaw where it tells you certain square footage of square meters of the plot has to recharge as well as harvest the rainwater. It's a bylaw, and you have to follow that. And so, great, you could do community harvesting, but it asks you to do within your own plot because you don't want it to go out. And it rains much more, so urban flooding is a big issue. There are laws in Singapore. You didn't ask, you told him not to speak, so I'm speaking for him. They treat their wastewater to such a good degree that they call it new water, and the president goes about showing that you can drink it. So, well, please vote for educated politicians who will take you forward, not divide you. Secondly, just yesterday, Australia elected a woman representative to its parliament and architect. And I don't remember the number, but quite a few number of women elected to the parliament on the grounds of environment. We need this. And we have data which shows the young people, 16 to 20 years old, also are thinking in patriarchal ways in India. So please, you have to change. We've been doing, and please listen to the next session, protests and cities.
It's not just that we have to elect educated people as politicians. I mean, we have to elect educated, but not just literate. We have too many literate politicians, but they are not educated enough.
Okay.
Sorry.
I just need to ask one more thing. What about here in Jaipur? Ever since I've come, I'm not from Jaipur, so it's been 5 years since I've been here. And ever since I've come here, I've seen there are so many empty plots and people are building individual houses. And like ma'am said, there is a bylaw in Bangalore. Why can't this kind of a bylaw be included in Jaipur city where there is water scarcity?
I think I would have to stop you, I'm sorry.
Sorry, sir, sorry.
Please get in touch with the speakers during lunch or afterwards. I'm really sorry about that. We have to wrap up the session with the dream and hope of what Chitra wanted to say, with the dream of electing the right leader, not only for India, for this part of the world, if not the whole globe. So with this dream, we come to an end of the session. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you. And don't forget, we have an expert session right after this. Please stay with us.
I request our speakers to please stay on the stage for the felicitation. Requesting architect Gyanendra Shekhawat and architect Ayush Bhardwaj to please take the stage for the felicitation. I request architect Gyanendra to sorry? Yeah, okay. I request you to please felicitate architect Qazi M. Arif. And architect Mridul. I request architect Ayush to felicitate architect Chitra Vishwanath. I request you to please felicitate architect Szue, Hann. So also please do the honors. Please felicitate architect Yatin Pandya.